Thank you, Tarindu and Megara. As they mentioned, when we think of unicorns, we all think of these mythical creatures we have grown up seeing in our nursery books, in our stories, etc. But unicorns in digital businesses are known as businesses that have over $1 billion investments. Yes. So today, we're here to discuss about Sri Lanka and unicorns. Why haven't we seen unicorns in Sri Lanka? What can we do to ensure that we see unicorns in hopefully the very near future? To discuss this, we have an eminent personality, Miss Ruchira Shukla. Hi, Miss Ruchira.
Hi, Shashikala. How are you? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Miss Ruchira is the head for South Asia Disruptive Technologies for the International Finance Corporation. So to start off, as we will have a strong focus on digital businesses today, I would like to ask you, Ms. Ruchira, as a country, does Sri Lanka have the fundamental pieces necessary to build a strong digital business?
Thank you, Shashikala. I think very much so, very much so. And when we think about what does it need to build a strong digital business, clearly connectivity, digital engagement is a key part of it. And Sri Lanka has very good connectivity with over 32 million mobile subscribers, which compares very well in terms of percentage of the population to other countries in the region. Sri Lanka also has a very strong pool of tech talent, something the country has to be absolutely proud of. And this is evident in the very recent Global Startup Ecosystem report that came out in 2022, which ranked Sri Lanka #2 in the Asian ecosystem for affordable talent. And that's very relevant today because, with the right engineering teams and the right technology vision, companies can become bigger in scale and solve very critical problems across sectors. So Sri Lanka certainly has the key ingredients. It also has large domestic conglomerates and large domestic players beginning to see the value of technology and wanting to adopt technical solutions themselves as well as to support digital startups. These domestic players could down the road become acquirers of tech disruptions created by startups. As a result, you have the key ingredients and an enabling environment to make it happen. So Sri Lanka is certainly very well positioned, Shashikala.
Thank you, Ms. Ruchira. So that's good news for all of us. Sri Lanka definitely has the necessary pieces to build a strong digital business. And that brings about to my very next question. Something we have heard, and from the statistics that we have seen, the unicorns are mainly in large countries, countries with very large populations or countries with very high capital investments. In this scenario, is the Sri Lankan domestic market too small for businesses to allow good investments to come in?
So there is a set of things that are that need to be considered when you think about why Sri Lanka hasn't or could produce unicorns down the road. One of the key factors is the fact, as you rightly pointed out, the domestic market is small. But I think that alone shouldn't be seen as the limitation because good startups can very well build strong businesses that extend beyond the Sri Lanka boundaries and can go to become regional winners. And as those winners get created, investors will come to back those companies and there will be a definite path to creation of unicorns. So just the domestic market being small should not be seen as a limitation. I think the other issue has also been that Sri Lanka has faced a series of macro crises, and that, coupled with the global pandemic, has made things very difficult. So investors from outside of the country have sort of been apprehensive to put capital in early stage startups, especially those, most of these early stage companies tend to be loss making, there is negative cash burn. And so, private capital needs to see a stable economic environment in which these digital companies can grow. And then the capital will come. The series of economic turmoil and the pandemic has actually made this more difficult in the last 2 years. But since the key ingredients are there, Shashikala, I remain very optimistic on the country.
Thank you, Ms. Ruchira, for that. We all remain optimistic. However, one interesting point you mentioned that the pandemic and the economic crisis and other economic turmoils that have been part of Sri Lanka, as a result, there perhaps may have been a slowdown in investments. I thought that was an interesting point you mentioned. And those coupled with all other inputs, how can we as a country get past this hurdle to attract great investments?
Look, the one key ingredient is that the economic turmoils have to go away, right? So, the country shouldn't be in a series of curfews. The country needs to see political stability. The country needs to have a very distinct promise for supporting tech startups. And that will create an entire peer-to-peer dialogue where key stakeholders in this ecosystem will come together to make it happen. And when I say key stakeholders, I mean entrepreneurs, investors, regulators, offline businesses that need to partner with digital businesses, large domestic corporates, even people from Sri Lanka that have migrated out of Sri Lanka, bringing their insights and their capital back into the country. So everything needs to come together. And as we said, key ingredients are there, but the whole thing has not come together, partly because the country has been has had such a volatile economic and macro situation. Stability is a must. And then sort of a policy and a commitment to supporting digital businesses is the second key thing that needs to come together. The third one, where you have a good start but needs to be accelerated, is there is already strong tech talent, as I mentioned before. There are very strong execution-focused entrepreneurs, and we have been very pleased with the execution of the tech startup. We've backed PickMe. They've executed extremely well through the storms over the last 2 years. And that ecosystem needs to start learning from each other. So tech entrepreneurs need to engage with other tech entrepreneurs and share their learning and insights. And then they need to bravely go after traditional businesses and find ways to disrupt those businesses. And some of the solutions can be borrowed from what's happened in the US, what's happened in China, what's happened in India, but sometimes those new business models and new solutions have to be specific to the local market. And that's where some disruption in business model and disruption in thinking has to be seen. And that will all bring together the favorable environment for these businesses to grow.
Understood. So coming together is key, and we understand all the macroeconomic conditions, the stability you mentioned, which are vital to thrive. And apart from those, are there any other key challenges digital businesses face in Sri Lanka?
I haven't seen too many fundamental issues, Shashikala. And as I was mentioning, we backed PickMe, we backed them in 2018. And they've had a tough 2 years because with COVID, there were a series of curfews. In 2019, there was terrorist attacks. Then there were, some election-related curfews. So the company has seen a lot of fits and starts. But each time things stabilize, the company goes into EBITDA positive territory. And that's remarkable because that's a sign of flawless execution. That tells you that what's holding the company back is not its own specific issues, but that the broader issues that the country as a whole is facing. So I think if the economic stability comes into place with it, these first phase of startups will see light of day. They'll start seeing traction. They'll start seeing the first set of investors come in and support them. And as they grow and scale, they'll become role models to other earlier stage, younger startups and younger entrepreneurs. And with that, you create a virtuous cycle where precedents are established, role models are created, and then with these kind of benchmarks that private capital can observe, more investors can come into the country with confidence.
That indeed is remarkable, like you said. Let's go a few steps backwards to pre crisis. Even the pre crisis, Sri Lanka necessarily didn't see any unicorns or billion-dollar investments. Why do you think the reason was for that? And is it only due to the size of the domestic market?
So I think look, digitization of certain sectors takes time, right? If you look at India back in late 90s, early 2000s, there was very limited digitization. A lot of the early models were web based, they were not mobile based. Mobile penetration at the time was lower. Use of mobile devices was limited, and therefore the population was not digitally savvy. So every country goes through its different phases from the early 2000s to, let's say, 2010, 2012 is when you started seeing the first e-commerce companies in 2005, 2006, and they came to scale by 2010. By 2015, there was a boom with a lot of these startups at high valuations. I'm still talking about India, by the way. And then from then on, there's been no stopping, and a lot of unicorns have been created. Every country has to go through that journey. So I think it would be unfair to say that even pre-crisis, Sri Lanka didn't see large digital businesses because of, just the domestic market being small. I think the country has to first familiarize itself with digital models that could disrupt traditional sectors. Entrepreneurs have to be created. It takes cycles after cycles for that shift to happen from being a largely non-digital economy to a digital economy. And for Sri Lanka, I think the right time for that shift started happening, I would say around 2010. And we've seen some good companies come out of Sri Lanka. WSO2 comes to mind as a very strong player, and I've been tracking them since 2013 onwards. And they've had a strong base of US-based customers where they provided middleware services to a lot of large blue chip clients based internationally. So tech businesses started getting traction even early in 2010, 2013. But of course, there has been a slowdown with the pandemic and with the macro crisis. And you need to wait till the entire economy shifts to accepting a digital way of doing business, having greater digital penetration in their day-to-day lives for their transactions, whether it's buying groceries, delivering parcels, watching content. Every habit for the consumer, as well as every process for the enterprise, needs to shift to digital in order to start giving traction to some of these early businesses.
Ladies and gentlemen, a kind reminder, if you do have any questions, please drop them on the WhatsApp number that was given to you prior to the session. So Ms. Ruchira, you mentioned that it's about a digital lifestyle, how so many aspects of our lifestyle need to become digital for us to facilitate this digital economy. You, as part of being IFC, I'm sure you have seen this digital lifestyle shift happening in many other countries. So what are some of the high investment countries for IFC in the region?
So IFC has put in a lot of capital in the digital economy in India. In India, we have backed 16 direct investments and 7 venture capital funds. The venture capital funds, then between the 7 venture capital funds, they have about 120 digital startups. So IFC's exposure, direct and indirect, across both the direct tech companies as well as indirect through RVC funds is about 140 companies. We've also started backing tech companies in Bangladesh. We've backed the leading e-grocery player as well as the leading e-logistics player. So, I would say in South Asia, it's India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And in these countries, our investments span across various sectors, and we are seeing companies grow from the Series A all the way to IPO stage companies, and we've backed in amongst our 16 companies in India, 8 have grown to be unicorns. So yes, we are very active, very prolific investors in the South Asia region and continue to do so.
Thank you for that. When taking South Asia, do you have any specific examples of any specific sectors that have thrived, or even if you can give us an example of a company about their success story, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I can talk about a few that we've backed over the years. In the early days, we started looking at vertical e-commerce. There were, of course, very strong and scaled players in horizontal e-commerce, but we felt that that space does get very competitive, and there is a lot of cash burn. IFC has stayed away from high cash burn businesses. So in the e-commerce space, we made a bet on vertical e-commerce, and in India, we invested in Big Basket, which is India's leading e-grocery startup. We've invested in Lenskart, which is a e-commerce platform for eyewear. In Bangladesh, we've backed Chalda, which is again the country's largest e-grocery startup. So in vertical e-commerce, those are the players that have done well for us. Big Basket, we entered Big Basket about, I would say, 7 odd years ago, and the company grew to be a unicorn, and IFC has finally exited its position, but the company continues to grow very well and continues to be a leader in its space. In the same space, we backed Chandal in Bangladesh, again a leader in its category. There was I think one small player competing with it when we invested, but the company has done so well that there's absolutely no competition now in that space. They continue to execute well in delivering essential groceries to various parts of Bangladesh, particularly those places which do not have retail stores, and so the company is serving an essential customer need. Another space which has worked very well for us is health tech. In health tech, we've backed India's leading integrated digital health tech platform. It's a company called 1MG that offers teleconsultations, e-pharmacy, and e-diagnostic services, and has grown very well. It has now taken an omni-channel approach, and besides selling things online, has also set up pharmacy retail stores, has also set up its own labs, and now offers, therefore, a both physical and an online solution for health services to patients. A third example I would take would be in the logistics space. We've backed backhaul as well as last mile logistics players. In India, we've backed a company called Black Buck, which is backhaul full truckload marketplace, which connects shippers to truck owners so that shipments can identify empty trucks and then be moved across the country at good prices. And in offering the digital platform, the company is disintermediating a long chain of brokers in the system, and hence allowing truck owners to get better pricing for their truck capacity. We've backed a similar business in Bangladesh called Truck Lagbe, again serving the same need and a leader in their space. So we invest across sectors. We've also invested in EduTech. A recent example in EduTech is an online platform that does higher education, and it allows working professionals to upskill and get either salary increases or better job opportunities because of the additional training and learning that the platform provides. They started in India and have scaled very well and have now become a global platform where they're even helping international universities attract talent from emerging markets. So you see in those examples, we've talked about e-commerce, we talked about health tech, edutech, logistics. IFC invests across sectors, and except for some sectors which we consider which are against our policy, for example, gambling or alcohol, anything that touches those industries, we stay away from there. But by and large, it's cross-sector, digital-first businesses.
Across e-commerce, health, edutech, logistics, all these sectors that you mentioned, which sectors, in your opinion, do you think Sri Lanka will have a really good future to invest in? Where should the new entrepreneurs come in? Where should more investments flow in? In which specific sectors?
Well, I think Sri Lanka continues to do very well in the ride-hailing space, and PicMe is our star company in that sector, as I mentioned before. So logistics and transportation is an important space, and there is promise for companies out of Sri Lanka to grow regionally. The other space which I think is important is health tech. And in health tech, IFC is championing a very important initiative. We are working with Hemas Hospital to figure out a way in which greater digital adoption can be enabled for hospitals like Hemas, where we have a study that is undertaken to figure out which elements of the hospital's processes could be digitized and find the right digital solutions for those hospitals to implement. So I think telehealth, e-diagnostics, e-pharmacies, uh, hospital information systems, health data records, anything in the healthcare space also has this key ingredient that it can be deployed across national boundaries very easily. So this ties back, Shashikala, to the point we were making earlier about the limited domestic market. Then if Sri Lankan entrepreneurs can innovate in the health tech space, then they are likely to build solutions that could be deployed across broader Asia, Africa, Middle East, and other markets. In health tech, there is a lot of room for innovation around the use of artificial intelligence, AR, VR, for making health services accessible and affordable for various populations that are underserved today. We have seen business models where AI is being used for reading pathology images, lab tests, blood smear slides, etc., to allow for the creation of reports in a streamlined and expedited manner. This solves for the lack of physician and health services capacity in certain spaces where remote locations can serve a market because of the availability of this technology. We also see a lot of room in using drones for the delivery of drugs or essential medical supplies. We are saying, blockchain for tracking drug supply chains. So there's a lot of room in health where Sri Lankan innovation could help not just the country, but the region. The third sector where I think important innovation is happening across the world globally today is the creator economy. The emergence of tools for individuals to start creating content and to make that content available globally over digital platforms has allowed people to take messages out that are informational in nature, that enable brand positioning, marketing messages, health messages, public interest messages. So there is a large influencer economy that is being created around the power of content creation tools for individual creators. IFC is very actively looking at that space because we feel that it has the power to generate livelihood for individuals as well as solve important economic problems. And I think there again, Sri Lanka has an advantage because it has the pool of strong tech talent, and content coming out of the country can be made available regionally as well as globally.
Thank you for mentioning all those sectors where Sri Lanka can have a future in. And just taking a step back, you mentioned about a few interesting companies like Big Basket in India, where IFC has worked with. From your experience, how did companies like Big Basket increase the digitization of a simple thing like grocery shopping? what strategies did they use in India or even in Bangladesh to digitize the entire process, to get more people into the digital aspect of the economy?
In the beginning, most of these when they start out, have to be better than competition, right? So for something like grocery, the competition is the cornerstone. So when a company like Big Basket starts out, it has to provide better level of service, better quality, better price than the closest competitor that the consumer has. And so they had to compete on all those fronts. And it did take a lot of effort on the part of the management team. It took capital because, they had to improve their sourcing in order to source better directly from farms, directly from the individual place where the food product was created, all the way to the customer's home. So they had to have efficient supply chain, they had to have cold chains in order to make sure that the quality of food delivered was fresh and better than the closest competitor. And of course, this includes not just fresh food, but also FMCG, the tea and the coffee and everything that people buy in their regular grocery basket. They have to make sure that they are facilitating smooth customer interaction, because a customer is so used to going down the grocery store and exchanging things. If they don't like it, they are asking for more, and they need to make their app, their digital engagement with the customer had to be extremely smooth and streamlined. So in the beginning, adoption is driven by customers believing that this is an easier, more affordable, better way to do things than the alternative. And over time, of course, new habits get formed. People start operating digitally. Of course, the pandemic, in a way, helped all digital businesses because it just made the offline option an inconvenient option. When cities were shut down, when there were curfews, people couldn't step out, didn't feel safe walking into a retail store buying something because of the risk of infection. That led to huge growth in digital adoption of all kinds of e-commerce. And we saw that both for Big Basket in India and for Chal Dal in Bangladesh, where people just switched to buying online. The other big facilitation is the ability to be able to pay online. The presence and penetration of credit cards, debit cards, and other forms of digital payment make e-commerce easier, right? So that is another enabling sector that has to open up and advance. And in India, as credit cards started going deeper in penetration, with the government creating UPI and therefore enabling micropayments, a lot of the digital payment enabled people to buy small things and not have to do cash on delivery, because cash on delivery becomes uneconomical for the e-commerce platform. Many people, when the goods has reached their house, choose not to pay, and there has to be an entire complication of reverse logistics. So having the right payment ecosystem also supported their growth. The fourth thing that supported their growth was logistics, right? You cannot deliver something if you don't have good roads, you don't have good fleet owners, smooth transition from the warehouse to the truck and to the customer's home, both backhaul and last mile. So with the growth of e-commerce, the logistics network started taking shape and started growing. And alongside e-commerce stars, we saw the birth of large delivery and e-logistics businesses also in the startup ecosystem, and they grew side by side, each supporting the other. And that enabled these companies to scale.
Digital payments, like you mentioned, a vital aspect in transforming our lives more digital. Where do you think Sri Lanka stands when it comes to digital payments compared to the other countries in the region?
I think Sri Lanka is pretty well placed across most sectors. And so I think in Sri Lanka's issue has not been the lack of innovation. Sri Lanka's issue has been stability. So I go back to what I was saying before, that in all of these spaces, Sri Lanka has the right ingredients and has to build its solutions out.
What do you think Sri Lanka needs to do in order to increase digital payments? Because personally, what I have seen is even when there are modes for digital payments, people opt for cash on delivery, cash payments by cash, etc. So, where do you think we need to go about that?
I think there has to be incentives and motivation for people to switch behaviors, right? So I'm not really privy to what incentive systems are currently in place in Sri Lanka, so I would not be able to comment on that. But people find cash easy. And it's only when the alternative is made super convenient will people switch. Plus, there needs to be a lot of education so people understand that digital are safe, that there are the right security systems. And I think in India, that also came from a strong government push on UPI and making sure that people felt safe about transacting online, either through net banking or through digital payments from various other tools that were based on the UPI platform. So I think there needs to be support and push from the government. People need to be educated on the safety and convenience of digital payments, and then habits will change.
Understood. And moving on to some of the questions, we have some very local specific questions coming in. As you know, we have a lot of power cuts these days due to the economic crisis. So someone has been asking about how can we do more digital businesses when the country doesn't have power. We can talk about all connectivity, but we don't have power to do any of these digitization activities. And they're suggesting maybe we need to have solar power, battery banks, telco towers. All of these need to be invested first before talking about all these digitization initiatives. What are your thoughts on this, Ms. Ruchira?
Absolutely. Look, this goes hand in hand, right? You asked earlier about what allowed India to have these different digital sectors boom. Um, India did spend the earlier years solving for cheaper data, greater connectivity, and continues to solve for that, right? So you need to have fiber, you need to have the right telecom ecosystem, the right infrastructure. You need to have the right, obviously, electrical infrastructure in order for any of these to flourish. That definitely is a must. So that's a very valid and key ingredient. So thank you to whoever raised that point. But I think one need not wait. So these things can go hand in hand. The countries can solve for some of their infrastructure issues as well as building digital businesses side by side. The way to do that is usually a lot of the digital businesses are born in key metros and the bigger cities, which often have less of an issue in electrical supply or internet connectivity. And then gradually, as some of this infrastructure penetrates smaller towns and rural areas, the digital businesses can then grow alongside into the interiors of the country. So it does happen in phases, and you're absolutely right, the key infrastructure needs to be put in place, but it doesn't mean the country has to stop to make that happen first. It can happen hand in hand, and as I was saying earlier, already Sri Lanka has 32 million mobile subscribers. So of course you need to solve for power, but the fact that there is connectivity and the fact that there is good tech talent, entrepreneurship does not need to wait. It can start from certain better equipped locations, and we can see that the startup ecosystem is already pretty vibrant in the Western province. And so it can start in certain parts of the country and gradually expand to other areas that as they become better connected and have better infrastructure.
Thank you, Ms. Ruchira. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any questions, you can either send it on WhatsApp, or if you want me to read it out, you can send me a small chit because we do have just a few minutes left. And moving on to the next question, we speak a lot about 5G. And again, there is a concern that in Sri Lanka, we do talk about 5G, but even in the Western province, sometimes we don't even have 4G, or sometimes we just have 2 bars of even 3G. And before we talk about 5G, how can we ensure that the necessary infrastructure for all these 3G, 4G are in place to have a strong platform before going beyond? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And this is the same question as earlier, right? You need to have the right infrastructure. So you're right, capital should first flow to the telcos. Capital should flow to creating this infrastructure. And in a way, it's important for all stakeholders to who care about digital advancement of the country to put their minds together and say, how do we make this happen? In a time when the world is talking about 5G, Sri Lanka cannot afford to not have 3G or 2 bars of 3G, right? If that's the situation, it certainly needs to be fixed. That is, I can't disagree with you there. It's an absolutely important point.
Right, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Does anyone have any other question for Ms. Ruchira? Okay, then. I think you've been crystal clear. Ms. Ruchira, thank you very much for joining us today and enlightening us. And ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause to Ms. Ruchira Shukla?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashikala. I enjoyed being here. And for the last person who had asked the question, let me give you one piece of good news before I sign off that as I said, connectivity is important. IFC invested $150 million in Dialogue to expand broadband connectivity across the country. So IFC remains committed to Sri Lanka, and IFC will support in the creation of a strong digital ecosystem for the country. Very nice to be here, and thank you to the organizers for putting together a fabulous event. Good luck to everyone.
Thank you. And like she said to all the people who had the questions on connectivity, IFC has invested $150 million. So hopefully we will not have that problem in the future. Thank you, everyone.